All right, welcome again, everyone. My name is Samantha, and I'm a product marketer at HackerEarth. A small introduction about HackerEarth for all those who aren't aware. In a nutshell, we are a global company that helps enterprises source, screen, interview, upskill, and continuously engage with developer and data science talent. We believe that tech hiring and engaging the tech community shouldn't be hard. Yes, there are critical pieces to put together throughout the life cycle of your developer talent so that you not only sustain, but also scale your engineering team successfully. But without the right solutions or tech, it can get challenging, right? We're talking about limited bandwidth, manual work, redundancies in the process, limited reach. Recruiters on the call, I'm sure you'll be able to relate. We're also talking about engineering manager dependency and limited bandwidth there. So yes, it can get pretty challenging. And that's where HackerEarth comes in. If you're wondering how we can help, and if you relate to all those challenges I just mentioned, please send me a yes in the chat section below, and I'll address that in just a bit. Now, moving on to the agenda for today's webinar, we are going to be presenting what we've uncovered through our developer survey. We spoke to a lot of developers over the past month, some of you on the call even, or listening in, to better understand and engage with our tech community today, because a lot has changed since the pandemic hit in. Right? We surveyed over 25,000 of them around the world, and all that led us to discover really great insights that has changed the way we think about developers and the entire tech community. So to break that down for us, we have HackerEarth's co-founder and CEO, Sachin Gupta, here to walk you through our survey report live. Hi, Sachin, welcome aboard.
Hey, Samantha. Pleased to be here. Excited about the event.
Thank you, Sachin. And also part of our panel is Radoslav Stankov, Head of Engineering at Product Hunt. Radoslav is here to contextualize our dev survey report in a way that highlights key emerging developer trends that the tech community should look forward to this year. Rado, welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rado. Last but not the least, please join me in welcoming Steve O'Brien today. Steve is the president of staffing at job.com and brings over 15 years of experience in the recruitment industry. He's here today to contextualize the HackerEarth Developer Survey report for the recruitment community, highlighting key tech hiring trends that can benefit tech recruiters, hiring managers, talent acquisition specialists in 2021 and beyond. Steve, it's always a pleasure hosting you. Welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Samantha. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve. All right, with that, we are ready to begin. Sachin, over to you.
Thanks, Samantha, and thanks for the introduction. I'd like to start off by saying I'm excited about this event, doing this together with you, Rado and Steve. Tons of insight that we're going to unmine today, and I hope the audience enjoys. So let's start with a little bit of introduction. If we look at the last 18 months, it's been unique. I think once in a lifetime event for everyone here, and I hope only once, no more. But the tech sector has seen massive growth in the last 18 months. This pandemic has led to urgent digitization in all sectors, and correspondingly, there has been an increased demand for tech talent. At HackerEarth too, we've seen rapid growth in our developer community, and it now nearly stands at about 6 million users all across the globe. And for us, understanding how this community thinks, what are their expectations, what are their dreams, is key to predicting the future for the tech industry. So HackerEarth's 2021 Developer Survey, which we named as Code in Progress, aims at capturing these insights and helping recruiters and managers across the world in understanding some of these trends. So let's start by talking about what can you expect from this survey report. So the 2021 survey aims to share insights into the preferences, challenges, work from home practices for two major segments, which are students and working professionals. And with these real and actionable insights about what developers look for when they're choosing jobs, how do they choose to upskill, how they have managed to work from home, and their expectations from future employers. We believe this report will help transform the skill-based hiring trend and further cement it in 2021. And in the process, we hope that the organizations will figure out a way how they can build better tech teams. So let's start by talking about whom did we survey. Uh, we spoke with 25,431 developers. Yes, those many developers across 171 countries. Our respondents, like I said, were both students and working professionals. And we deliberately categorized the survey result into these two segments, which are students and working professionals. One of the reasons is if you look at the tech industry today, there is going to be a massive influx of young talent into the software developer community as the demand for, as the demand for tech talent increases. Obviously, more and more people are going to choose software development as their career. So having a focus on students is kind of important if you're thinking 4 or 5 years out as to how do I think about my brand as an employer, what are the things that developers who are still students thinking about, and how can I capture the imaginations of early talent. So like I said, students have both the potential and intent to be talented developers. That's why gathering their opinion was crucial to us. What we found out was, what we focused on basically was uh, some insights on popular domains and technologies that developers like, choice of their workplace, and number of hours that they spend regularly on coding. And some of the key insights that we discovered was AI and data science, no surprise there, are the fields where students are most interested in. This personally I've seen as a trend for almost last 5 or 6 years. The popularity which this domain is gathering has a lot of momentum today, and rightly so, because a lot of software development is becoming more and more data heavy, and data science is almost like today I don't come across any software engineering team which does not have a data science component. So it's natural that both the demand and supply for this skill is going to increase. Also, one interesting trend that we figured out or found out from data was majority of students want to work in startups, and majority of students practice coding anything between 1 to 3 hours a day. And when we talk about, let's talk a little bit about working professionals. So from the lens of working professionals, there has been a huge change. Samantha, can you change the slide? Okay, thank you. So when we look at it from the lens of working professional, there's been a huge change in the tech industry as remote work became the de facto way of working in the wake of the pandemic. Like I would say in some parts of tech industry, remote work was already there. So it's not a completely foreign concept to the tech workforce, but majority of employers were still, working from office. And I think whenever I talk to engineering managers and tech leaders, what comes across is very significantly is that there has been a sharp increase in productivity as teams became remote, and then they saw kind of a decline because burn started, setting in, and now it's kind of stabilizing, which we hope in the long run the productivity levels are at least hopefully higher than what they were while people were working from office. But we looked at a number of the kind of questions that we posed to the working professionals were around the years of work experience, what technologies they're familiar with, and from where they work. And what we found is majority of our respondents work in enterprises, larger enterprises. Software engineer is the most popular job title, and IT was the most popular industry. So none of these trends kind of are something that you wouldn't expect. One of the moving on, one of the key focus areas of this survey and the report that we subsequently generated was around or is around developer skills. And in fact, HackerEarth itself and what we do is firmly rooted in the concept of a skill. We believe, pedigree, where you come from, where you worked at, doesn't really matter too much as long as you can demonstrate the skills that you have, and those skills are what are needed for the job. And as more and more people come into the software industry as the career of their choice, we'll see people coming in from more unconventional sources. So today, having an education in or a formal education in computer science is not necessarily a prerequisite for you to be a good software developer, which again kind of links or points towards the underlying trend that's taking place in the industry, is that the whole recruiting process is moving towards a skill-based hiring process. And in light of that, it's obvious that one should focus on what are some of the key developer skills that people are looking for, not just in terms of their existing skills, but also the skills that people are looking to develop. So it's not a surprise that given the open source and a lightweight nature of Node.js framework, that it is popular among both student developers as well as professionals. However, despite its popularity, AngularJS is the most preferred framework among pros. And React and Spring are some other frameworks that experienced developers are comfortable with. Meanwhile, students have expressed a desire to learn AngularJS, while professional developers see a lot of value in learning Django. Again, moving on, it's not really a surprise that the most popular programming languages are C++, Python, and Java, and that's purely because of the kind of momentum that they have gathered over the years. So a lot of major applications, larger organizations still continue to use Java heavily, Java, C++, and Python heavily. Python has obviously gained a lot of popularity, I would say, in the last 1 decade. And because of the sheer mass, these three are kind of the most popular languages. But when it comes to developing newer skills, a lot of developers show an interest in wanting to learn Go, Rust, and Kotlin. And the flexibility offered by Go with the ability to engineer solutions for both system as well as network programming, big data, machine learning, audio video editing, and among other use cases, it obviously is one of the more sought after languages in 2021. Next slide, Samantha. Continuing the trend from 2020, again, not really a big surprise. Data science has once again come out to be on the top as the domain that both students as well as working professionals want to either develop their skills mostly and then eventually build their career. So one of the things that I've seen is a lot of developers want to dabble around with data science, get their hands dirty. And initially, it's just the curiosity to kind of understand what this is all about. And once they get hooked on, they also look at kind of transitioning into that as a career choice. And this trend will continues well into the future as we are discovering, and I touched upon this a little bit earlier, as we discover more and more problems that can be solved through statistical and probabilistic problem solving. So one of the things, big data has been around for a couple of decades now, but one of the fundamental change that has taken place, at least in my opinion, is that big data is not democratized. Probably a decade or a decade and a half back, big data was mostly something that organizations like Google and Facebook of the world would possess and process both. But today, even smaller organizations are generating tons and tons of data. And it's only natural that once you've collected so much data that you start mining it and start getting some results out of it. So data science is here to stay, here to grow, and continues to be, I would say, a domain of choice for a lot of people. What's interesting is that cybersecurity and blockchain are not too far behind. So if you would see data science, a quarter of the population said data science is what they're looking at, but then blockchain and cybersecurity together constitutes another 30%, which makes sense because of so much that's happening in blockchain and cybersec. Moving on. So here we wanted to talk about how are developers getting access to news, and by far social media groups are the most popular platform, where about 26% of student developers and about 20% of professionals get access to the tech news. Other venues used by them are to stand up include Medium and other tech related blogs. And then you would see that this continues to be like blogging became kind of popular or a lot popular because of the tech content that's been out there, and that continues to be the trend. So Medium, where it has grown today, is in a lot because of the heavy focus that Medium had on tech content in the earlier days. So a lot of student developers and professionals continue to use these channels to get access to news. Then the next thing that we talked about was upskilling and how are developers, keeping themselves updated. How are they practicing their existing skills and improving their, improving their existing skills and developing new skills. So platforms like YouTube tutorials and Stack Overflow are prominent channels for developers to upskill themselves. A significant chunk, which is 18% of students and 17% of pros. Also dependent on online coding platforms like HackerEarth to improve their skills. So while a lot of video content and Q&A content through Stack Overflow continues to be a medium of choice, there are people who like to go to a lot of online coding platforms to actually do hands-on coding and improve their skills. Moving on, one of the things that's been most talked about, and I did kind of allude to this earlier as well, is productivity, and productivity particularly in the light of COVID and the pandemic and everybody going remote. So I think it's made harder for everybody in general to maintain the productivity levels. Precisely because humans are social animals, and there is a certain level of goodness that we feed off when we're working at workplaces. But then there are some sections, some fraction of population that feel a lot more productive when they are working remotely, when they are working in their own silos. So given that we have had almost what I would say 15 months now behind us when the entire world really has been working remotely, I think there's a lot of data, a lot of hindsight that we can dip into and understand how people or how developers specifically can be more productive as we look forward in a post-pandemic world. So, next slide. So one of the things that we found are that experienced developers who work at enterprises are marginally less happy in comparison to people who work at smaller companies. And employees from middle market organizations had the highest happiness index. However, what's interesting is happiness is not a binding factor for where developers work. So despite scoring the least on the happiness scale, working pros would still like to work at enterprises, would like to work at enterprises and growth stage startups. The reason could be multiple reasons like higher compensation, job stability, and learning opportunities. Next slide. With companies going remote, video calls have obviously shot through the roof. We all are struggling with Zoom fatigue, and quite ironic that we're doing this on Zoom itself, but that's the nature of this pandemic. Everything is happening through videos, and this has led to many working professionals feeling burnt out. And obviously our surveys reflect they reflect the same. So like I was saying earlier, at least in my own personal conversations with engineering managers, I think immediately after the pandemic set in, everybody went remote. There were increases in productivity levels because I think, and this is just a hypothesis, but a lot of focus in the early days was around execution. You already knew what was the roadmap, what you have to implement, what are you working on. It was more about going in your silos and kind of executing it. So productivity levels kind of shot. But then when it continued, and then it was a quarter end, time to go back to the drawing board, time to look at roadmap, time to kind of come up with creative ideas. That's when people started facing more difficulties because it's naturally a little harder to do that on video, and that led to more video calls or more meetings, and add into the mix new joiner onboarding or working with interns, helping them out, or managing the release timeline and cadence. And when you add all of those, some of those things that earlier would happen in a casual chat when you're strolling around the office or when you're on the water cooler is not happening anymore. And that information exchange has to happen through a structured meeting. And that just adds to more meetings. And developers said that lesser number of meetings would really go a long way in them achieving higher productivity. One interesting insight, particularly for me, this was a little surprising, is that both students, about 36%, and working pros, 26%, favor MS Windows over all else for the development. One of the reasons for this could be, when developers are early in their career, they start off as PC as their like the system that they're using anyways, and then continue developing on it. I think a lot of it can also be attributed to Visual Studio. Visual Studio has like really changed the landscape of IDEs, and almost every developer that I talk to is very comfortable with, or wants to use Visual Studio. And then all said and done, .NET frameworks and Microsoft tech stack it continues to be a fairly big, I would say, a contributor or a fairly big ecosystem because of so many legacy systems that are running on the Windows or the Microsoft tech stack. Next slide. So, this was, so up till now we were talking about, we've spoken about skills, what technologies developers are looking at, what kind of productivity levels are there, what trends people want there. Changing gears a little bit, let's talk about, developers exploring their next opportunity. So we asked developers what works when it comes to finding work for themselves in this year. And we got a deeper understanding of how opportunities are found, what employee value propositions are must-haves, what developers prefer when it comes to tech recruitment and coding interviews, and that's particularly a highly debated topic, coding interviews, and what aspect of working in big tech are attractive. So what, not really a surprise, but what came out was no other platform comes close to LinkedIn when it comes to sourcing job opportunities. So 58% of students and 49% of pros said that LinkedIn is a reliable way for them to hunt jobs. Other preferred channels included job boards and referrals, as opposed to developer tech conferences and virtual career fairs. So those are some of the sources that haven't really been working out for either the students or the developers. When it comes to what people look for in their next opportunity, 63% of student developers who are just starting in the tech world said a good career growth curve is a must-have. And that's kind of obvious, right? You're starting off early in your career. You want to be at a place where you're challenged, where you can see rapid growth, where you get access to interesting problems to solve. However, 69% of working professionals can be wooed by offers of a good career path and compensation. So again, naturally, compensation increasingly becomes, I would say, one of the more important factors as one progresses from early to mid and mid to late career for themselves. Students and both professionals alike also want to work with companies that have financial stability, who offer interesting technical challenges, and there's a good workplace culture. One trend that has changed for us since last year is that at least 50% of student and working professionals alike do care about ESOPs and positive Glassdoor reviews. So there is, an increasing, and this essentially, is reflective of the high growth market that we see. Companies going public, a lot of employees make a lot of significant, earnings, get a lot of earnings from those ESOPs finally translating into options which can be traded in the public market. And because today there are so many options for developers, they can afford to be picky and choosy. They can afford to say, hey, I want to work with a company that has a good culture, and that's where Glassdoor reviews or any kind of review becomes important. But thing to note is, while these are not must-have, these are added benefits that they want to be offered. So primary thing continues to be a good career path, good growth, followed by compensation. But then if you can add some of these other things, it becomes an interesting offer for them. So I think, changing gears, talking a little bit about interviewing experiences, what's a good interview experience, what do developers look for? And like I said, it's a much talked about topic, mostly because technical interviewing is so hard. I've seen companies take 6, 7, 8 rounds of interviews. Is debatable whether that's good or bad, and I'm not in a position to kind of comment on that. But then that obviously got impacted because of COVID. So what used to happen as an on-site 1 full day of interviewing today is now happening on video calls, split across multiple days. Put that, combine that with the need to kind of ramp up significantly because your organization is digitizing, which means you need to hire more people. All of those things put together into the mix, and the very fact that unlike work, which again this is a personal opinion, which has its advantages of working remotely, one could argue that when you're not doing the interview in person, you're not really connecting with people. And at least a lot of hiring managers that I spoke with early when the pandemic set in were very wary about it. How's going to be my experience? Will I be able to really understand who the person is on the other side? And I think we've had some interesting learnings over the last 15 months, and hopefully we've been positively surprised. So, it's like I said, it's not a surprise that developer interviews are a challenging experience. And recruiters need to actively identify gaps in their interview process and provide a much better candidate experience, because it's been said time and again, even if you don't hire a person, these folks end up becoming they go and take your brand outside and talk about both a good and a bad interviewing experience. And each person that you don't hire or hire, each person has 5 friends they could potentially tell or refer to you. So candidate experience is probably one of the most critical things that recruiting teams should focus on. One of the things that we found out, almost 40% of pros said that a good first step to build strong candidate experience is to offer feedback to a candidate after an interview. And I know that it has its own challenges because the whole legal aspect comes into picture. You have to be careful, you have to be sensitive, what information to reveal, what not to reveal. And there's potentially also an issue that if we do share feedback transparently, would it come back and would it become an issue because someone could say, hey, I have not been evaluated fairly, and all of those things kind of come into foray. But what we have seen from the survey and even in our personal interactions is even some amount of feedback to the candidate is helpful, because it then helps them to understand what didn't really work out so that they are better prepared for the next interview. So I think if organizations can work on this, more, I would say strategically, come up with a framework as to what things can be shared and almost create like a template that hiring managers can use, then as a process share that feedback, I think it would go a long way in building that candidate experience. Also, too many rounds in the interview process and hiring process that people don't like. One of the questions that we asked people was around remote interviewing, and given that they have done in-person interview and now they're doing remote interviews, what do they prefer, and what would they like to see going forward? So almost 40% of working professionals prefer remote interviewing tools that are equipped with video, audio, and of course, collaborative code editor. The process they believe is hassle-free and provides an objective evaluation in the interview. The next after this comes, take-home coding tests, coupled with remote interviews, and then followed by take-home coding tests coupled with on-site interviews. So, as if as an interviewer you have an apprehension whether you're able to assess talent more accurately during a remote interview, you must also keep in perspective that from a candidate perspective, it's a lot better experience. And there are multiple reasons, right? Explaining code on a whiteboard is hard. Everybody knows that. Traveling time in these on-site interviews is not trivial. Sometimes when the candidate is out of station, then you've got to fly and take a flight, and scheduling and all of those things come into picture. And then but all of this kind of goes away if you're doing it online, if you're doing it remotely. But more importantly, there is a collaborative environment in which you could kind of collaborate together. So I think the key piece here is being able to work together in an environment which people are comfortable with, and doing it at the convenience of their home is definitely a big value add as opposed to doing on-site interviews. Moving on, nearly 84% of students and 77% of the experienced professional attest that. So this is more about what are some of the factors that developers look for in big tech, particularly big tech companies. Attest that a strong culture of testing and quality assurance at big tech companies has an allure. Other big tech characteristics that developers appreciate are an integrated technology platform, technology that powers their platforms, and the fact that the inner workings of most big tech companies are perceived to be a well-oiled machine. So, there are obviously advantages of, we being a startup, we can actually kind of contrast this feedback with what people see at smaller organizations. So I personally believe that for a balanced, well-rounded career growth, a developer should get an experience of both. You've got to be in a chaotic environment, be comfortable in moving fast, breaking things, maybe putting things to production every other week, if not every other day. While at the same time, there is a lot of merit in understanding how more mature processes run. How do you build a strong QA culture? How are release cycles managed when you're potentially deploying your solutions to millions of users, and one bug could have catastrophic effects. So having experience on both of them is definitely, in my personal opinion, leads to overall well-rounded career growth. So with that, we come to an end to the overview that we had for you today of our developer survey. If you would like to dive in deeper into the analytics, head over to our website at www.hackerearth.com and download the Code in Progress report under the resources section. The report is free and freely available to everyone who wants to access it. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we can address them towards the end of the webinar. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you for that, Sachin. As you saw, there were quite a lot of interesting insights that HackerEarth uncovered through this extensive survey. The report is up on our website, as Sachin mentioned, under the resources section, carrying the title Code in Progress. So please feel free to download a copy if you'd like to get, a deeper understanding of the analytics that was presented today. Moving on, I'll be handing it over to Steve to highlight how this data can actually help the tech recruiting community hire better and hire faster. Steve, please take it away.
Thanks, Samantha. Thanks, Sachin, for going through that data. This report is an incredible resource that you guys have created. So I have a unique opportunity here as a recruiter to talk about the people that we're recruiting in front of them. So, developers, as I say things that indicate what I think will help us be better partners for you, be gentle if I make a bad inference, and know that it's from a good place, because deeply and desperately recruiters are trying to figure out what is the best way to partner with hiring managers and with yourselves as candidates. Recruiters, what I want to offer you here is perhaps Steve's interpretation of how to apply this data. Now, the reason I say that is this is an incredible tome of information about the IT market and a set of graphs that can inspire all kinds of inferences and insights into the way that we can better partner with our hiring managers, that we can better plan our days, and we can better help the candidates that we work with. So if you disagree with my inference, just like the developers, be gentle. And if you take one encouragement from what I have to say, it is to spend a bit of time with this data, because having done it myself, I can say with confidence, it's going to inspire some insights and give you some ideas about how to better navigate the market. As we know, we need that, because of all the things that are easy in this world, hiring IT talent is not one of them. All right, I've organized the inferences into three sections. One is inferences about the hiring manager. The second is, of course, you, because recruiters, we always need to be included. And then the final is a bit of empathy and a bit of imagining about what is this like for the developers that we're trying to recruit. Okay, so I'm going to screen share if that's still okay with you, Samantha, because I've teed up a few of the slides in particular that I think ground the inference. Also show you guys as recruiters the way that I'm trying to leverage the data to provide a evidential background to the position in the same way that I'd suggest that you do it with your hiring managers, right, as you're working with them. All right, so I'm going to start screen share. And you're going to ignore the riffraff on my desktop. And you are going to focus on the beautiful survey here, from which I've teed up a few slides sequentially. Okay. All right. So the first insight or inference that I'd like to make is that ultimately what the developer talent is looking for, or what this is about for them, is the work. Now, perhaps that's not controversial, but I want to be clear that as we're trying to help our hiring managers understand best ways to sell and recruit for their position, because they're a part of this process, it's important that they also understand that this isn't about bells and whistles. It isn't about being a leader in the financial market or that we're a great biotech company. The survey tells us, or at least in my opinion, that the next job opportunity for a developer is about the work. Now, there's an interesting data point here that I think really underscores that. And I understand here that developer happiness, as you see in front of you, is correlated to work hours. But there's an oddity that I think is worth recognizing. Okay, let's look at the bottom data point, less than 40 hours. Let's call it 6.6. And then more than 60 hours. Well, let's call it 6.4. What this is showing us is that for a developer, you can increase their workload by 50% and you'll barely impact their happiness. Look, I can tell you, if anybody increased my workload by 50%, it would impact my happiness. That's evidence of passion. And it's evidence that what these developers are doing, they love, that they enjoy. And when they're looking for a new opportunity, it's about the work. Now, as we're working with the developers and we're helping the hiring managers understand that you must communicate what is desirable and what is interesting about your role from a work perspective, we also need to make sure that the hiring managers know that you can't kill my talent pool. You're not allowed to. Developers, you guys are special, and not just because your mom told you. A lot of you guys have very unique skill sets, and a lot of you guys are actually pretty difficult to source or to find. So when we look at the various skill sets that developers have, we see down here, I know this in blue, and I'd like to know this in, let's call it seafoam, a very pretty color. On the left-hand side, the blue, those are small numbers, right? And a lot of those skill sets are less than 10%. And so if you have a candidate that has one of these niche skill sets, the hiring manager needs to understand how important for you and for the company that you work for, right? For the value of the shareholder, which you are looking to defend and advance as a recruiter, that you can't under execute the candidate experience, making sure the candidate understands their time is valuable. We take them seriously and we want to give them feedback, right? We heard that not getting feedback is one of the biggest areas of frustration. This makes our advice and encouragement to hiring managers not only grounded in what the developers themselves are saying that they wanted, but also from a market perspective, a bit of wisdom that just because today this candidate isn't a fit, I can't allow you to under execute on the hiring or the candidate experience because their skill sets are unique. The last piece is when we're going through and preparing to recruit for a hiring manager, this data shows us that we must understand the environment that we're going to be recruiting somebody into. The ability to relax and manage their schedule was one of the most consistent points of focus throughout the data as the developers described their work environment. Most developers indicated that they like to take walks, right? Now, that doesn't mean anything in particular, except that sometimes they need to get away and sometimes they need to decompress and they need the freedom and the ability from back-to-back meetings and a constrained and micromanaged environment so that they can process, so that they can decompress, so that when they sit back down to code, they're able to do it with a clear head and the creative inspiration that needs to combine with the technical competency to actually write great code. They also said that they have Zoom fatigue and there's way too many meetings. Or one of the things that they'd be looking for if they were to find a new job is an understanding that there aren't going to be too many meetings. So when we're working with our hiring managers, making sure they understand that we need to understand the environment so that we can sell that to the candidates, because this is one of the most significant things that they're looking for. In addition, during the interview process, this conversation helps the hiring manager understand how to caution away, especially if it's not true, from over communicating an over structured or micromanaging environment because that's unattractive. All right. Recruiters. The desire of the coder that we're looking to recruit is pretty diverse. Why does that matter? It matters because we can't stereotype the people that we're recruiting, right? As much as I communicate during the intake call with the hiring manager that we need to establish patterns, when we turn around and walk away from that meeting, we need to recognize that as we're establishing patterns, we're preparing the hiring manager to succeed. And we're trying to limit the ability for them to accidentally mess up the search. I don't mean that condescendingly. I mean that hiring managers don't specialize in hiring, and we do. But when you turn around and you start talking to the market, it's important that we sort of put on a new lens. Here's where I want to look at the seafoam side of this graph. Things that I'd like to learn. It looks like all the developers want to learn all the things, right? I mean, the appetite for exploration and the appetite for learning is extraordinary. So understand as you're talking to your developers and you're trying to create a value gradient, right? You're trying to communicate to them that there's something you're doing now that's not as good as something that I could have you doing. Let them share that with you. The desires that we see in the slide to learn new things is broad and diverse, and you see in this a very significant appetite from developers to grow and to develop. We not only see this in the appetite, but the top two must-haves for a new job were related to the work and the ability to develop a career path, right? So as we go to the market, let the recruiter, let the candidate show you a little bit about how you could recruit them. Learn about their desires, learn about their interests, and take good notes. Remember that information. It shows that you're a human. It also shows when you call that person back that you take their interests and their career seriously, so that you increase the likelihood that they'll trust you as you help shepherd them to what might be their next career step. The next is don't give in to the patterns around what kind of enterprise somebody works for or doesn't work for. Hold on one second. Sorry, guys. I knew there was going to be a gap here. Okay. So here's what I mean by don't give in to the patterns. We see these economic swim lanes, so to speak, where 8% of people work in the middle market, 42% of people work in the enterprise, 25% of growth, 25% of people work in growth stage. And what we could end up doing as recruiters is instead of seeing the various opportunities that exist in selling value propositions to people that come from different environments, we might just see our one segment, right? And perhaps we would see enterprise at 42 and be overconfident, or perhaps we would see 8% in middle market and be insecure. Don't look at the market that way if I can offer you that encouragement. Understand that each of these market segments has an opportunity and it has a vulnerability. When you look at enterprise, they have a lot of safety, right? There's often great career benefits. You have a career path. Sometimes you have early and aspiring talent programs. When you look at startups, you don't have as much safety, but you have adventure, right? As you're going out and you're now starting to sell to the candidate the reason you believe that what job you have might just be their next career step, be prepared to sell whatever the value is that you have, right? If you have enterprise, sell safety. Understand if that's valuable to the candidate and then help them visualize themselves enjoying it. If you have adventure, sell adventure, and know that if you've got an enterprise candidate on the phone, perhaps a little bit of adventure is just what they're hungering for, coming from the safety of enterprise, right? So look at this data not as a constriction or not as a vulnerability for you with what you're selling, but as almost a code that you can look at and say, here's the way that I'm going to sell what I have to the market. And I've always got a balance, no matter what kind of market I'm in, between safety and adventure, and blend those and communicate those compellingly to the candidates that you're working with. Now, finally, the candidate themselves. I'm going to go to tab 5 here. Here's one of the things that I think is perhaps the biggest shift for me as I look at the patterns in talent. Yes, 45% of people that code learn to code at their undergraduate degree, but let's think about a different way to phrase that. Less than half of developers learn to develop in college. That's crazy to me, right? I mean, coming from an age where obviously you get a degree and the degree teaches you how you're going to do what you do, and then you get a job. I am in no way undermining that path to education and to an opportunity, but we are seeing in the market that there is a major segment that isn't necessarily following that path to this skill set, right? And so what does that mean? It means the developer may also begin starting to look at their skill set differently. They may start to look at it more from a performance perspective or more from a, let me show you what I can do. In chapter 5 on slide 4, the most significant concentration of responses on how they'd like to be interviewed was that they want to be tested. Development is not necessarily about a pedigree. It's about a potentiality, right? It's what can I do for you? And how can I show you the way that I'm going to deliver that code for you and those functionalities to the users of your technology? Really interesting shift, and something for us to keep in mind as we're empathizing with the candidates that we're working on. Not as much pedigree and more about potential that is demonstrated through testing these developers. The next is, as we spend time together here, we're working and we're spending an hour trying to understand this. When you focus exclusively, or not exclusively, but extensively at a market segment, here's what we end up doing to that market segment. Now, developers, again, I'm talking about you. We teach developers that they're going to be recruited, right? We make the market more passive because we imply to the developers that there is a good chance the next way that their job is going to come to them is through a recruiter. Just keep that in mind as you're working with your candidates. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying it's happening. When there's a big imbalance between supply and demand, those with the scarce capabilities begin to expect things during the interview process. Who cares if it's right or wrong? It just is. And so be prepared to compete for the attention of the developer that you're trying to recruit. This is what's going on in the market. This is the reality that we're working with. Understand and empathize. They're probably talking to some other recruiters. They may have applied to a couple jobs themselves. As a recruiter, you're going to need to find a way to be different or find a way to capture the attention of the developer. And it won't just be putting a job out there for them to apply to, or as soon as you get on the phone with the candidate saying, tell me about your experience, or why do you want this job? Those are sort of power positions. And as recruiters working in a scarce skill set market, we need to be far more engaging and far more empathetic to garner the attention of the folks that we want to recruit. And then finally, one of the most important functions that a recruiter plays is helping both the hiring manager and the candidate envision a future different than the one they have right now, the one that they're destined for today, right? We are in many ways vision casters, and we don't do it sort of just to get somebody to buy anything that we can imagine. We want to understand the hiring manager and we want to understand the candidate so that we can bring together a future that they didn't have until you got involved and matched it up. That's an exciting opportunity and a really engaging area for us to work in, right? Like, how satisfying is it to know that you are a part of somebody's career transition? Now, for those that we're working with that are going to make a career transition through you as a recruiter, we can pretty reasonably assume that they have more choices than they know what to do with and more ways of making a decision than they're sure how to prioritize or to analyze. There's an interesting study back in 2000 from Stanford University in Columbia. It's a pretty popular study, so some of you might have heard of it. It's the jelly study. Very briefly, the jelly study found that if you had 20 or more jellies at a grocery store, you would get a big crowd, but you wouldn't get many purchases. And if you had 3 jellies, you would get a smaller crowd, but far more purchases. As we're looking at this data and as we're working with the candidates that we're trying to support, one of the things that will be valuable to them and one of the ways that we will help ourselves be more effective is simplify and help develop selection and decision criteria. There's a lot of options in front of hiring managers, and there's a lot of options in front of the candidates that we're working with. Use this data to help you simplify and direct and establish decision criteria so that we can help continue to have careers move forward and fill the roles that we've got assigned to us. And that's all I got, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was just brilliant. Again, this is for the audience. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Steve when it comes to how you can further use these analytics in your hiring recruiting strategy, or if you have any questions based on his thoughts and ideas that was just shared, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box that you see, and we'll address them soon. Now, moving on, we have Rado stepping in, our tech expert, who will be contextualizing this data for the developer community and share important trends that they can look out and follow. Rado, over to you.
Thank you. And Steve, thank you very much. Yeah, you summarized it really great. Like part of my job is to be like a hiring manager. And yeah, a lot of the things I was thinking, you tell them aloud. So something for the data. One thing I really like is in the whole data set, and this is something as I like history. And with history, notice here the differences between the working professionals and the students. And of course, obviously, there is a very low number of students who are above 42 now, of course. But if we notice the data here, like interesting when people start to code. Some very interesting trend is people are starting to code a lot younger, like 15 to 21. And if you notice, this percentage is increasing. That means we are getting a lot more younger people joining. And another interesting piece of information here is, especially for people who are between 22 and 24, in 41, there is still chance for them to start. It's not just young people's game. There is enough people you can join at any moment. And especially this, where do you start learning and when do you get your education from, is very interesting. And you can also see these historical trends that a lot of students get from developer boot camps, while it's not as big a number as the working professionals yet, because for students, they're a lot more used to online courses, online platforms, and more online, like the new generation of people are more used to that. So that's a very interesting trend in general. Going a bit more about the technical stacks, and that's something very interesting as well to see how those trends from I know and I would like to learn increase. Like, for example, I was very surprised by the number of people who wanted to learn Angular, since it's a bit more enterprisey. But apart from that, you would see that there is a lot of, just one sec to move this, because it's in front of my cursor, there is like a lot of, I want to learn technologies that are not cool anymore, like XJS is something that's not so cool. And it's very interesting that the younger generation still holds on to those technologies. And this shows that there is no technologies that are dying, apart from like popular belief. And also from this trend, I'm seeing that, okay, if you like a technology, you would most probably find a place to work with. So if you're a developer, my advice to a lot of developers is don't just pick the technology because it's cool and everybody just go to it. Just pick technologies it fits you and makes you enjoy working with it. And from this chart, it's obvious that like people are all over the place with technologies, and that's amazing. We want to have more diverse technology sets. And moving on, it's stuff around the programming languages. I'm also surprised about Visual Basic here, to be honest. But also it's this trend that the only differences between the students and professionals is like, if you switch the charts, you would notice that, of course, the professionals know a lot more technologies just because they have a lot more professional experience, but technologies don't change that much. And people are really focused on all over the place, and that's great, in my opinion. Just wanted to highlight this for a second time. Something which also was surprising in this study here is, of course, data science is the top of the notch. It's something that's going to be very important. It's an area which was underserved. The whole data science in general is not very well defined. But something that's very interesting for students is they're not very interested in business intelligence compared to more older professionals. I can imagine like a lot of people working in these areas. The other thing is that the usual game developer, like the older you get, the less you enjoy game developer. And for younger people, game development is still like a very, I love games, so I want to make them. I'm very surprised a lot of young people want to go into cybersecurity, which is really hard topic, really interesting thing. And the thing which surprised me the most is that robotics and blockchain are not so interesting for young people, while blockchain is very interesting for professionals. This is something which I would definitely dig the data through, because it's a very interesting piece of knowledge here and really shows that the technology trends, right, which we hear right now about the crypto and all of that, are maybe not touching the young people so much. Moving on, I want to see around, this was around how people are improving their skills. And it's surprising that Stack Overflow is not even in the students' dictionary. That's totally amazed me when I was checking this data. And for me, again, the situation here is when you're a professional, you hear about Stack Overflow from your friends and from Google searches, while a lot of the younger generation are focusing on online. Offline is very off here, while again, a lot of the older generation, and of course YouTube is the king of all, but the younger people are more focused on like online, and the variety here is very interesting. Another thing on that site is, and this is something which Steve mentioned, is that the number of hours working very varies between the different people, and it actually doesn't vary that much. It's like originally when I saw that on a bigger screen, this was like very similar lines, and that's very, very, very interesting. And this show, I would actually love to see the split between the professionals and non-professionals to see if older people are just less passionate or just have less time. That would be something I would have to dig into more. And the things about developer productivity, this is something especially for younger people, which still don't have big developed habits of how they develop their skills. This is actually a very good thing for them to try out. Like if you're a younger developer, even if you're a experienced one, I would definitely want you to try noise canceling headphones if you never tried those, even at home. If you have like a dog or something that makes a lot of noise, especially. Multiple monitors is also something which I have seen a lot of people not try for some reasons. Clutter-free working space is a very interesting concept and I think you should also try this. Please be careful with the unlimited coffee and food. We have to take our health seriously. Less meetings, it's also something which we as developers obviously don't like. We just, as it's obvious, I can imagine that most people who would say I work 40 hours and I have 20 hours of meetings and I don't count this as a work. So for this, I would say just people to try out those different things. Moving on. And yeah, the problems were from working from home. And I can imagine, again, the lack of human interaction is a big thing. Like a good thing around, like this is something which was mentioned before, that people increased their productivity early on in the pandemic because they had their roadmaps and it was just execution. Something for remote is this saying that remote is great for execution, but is bad for breadth, and in person is great for brainstorming and coming up with ideas. So a lot of that lack of interaction is also something interesting. I can imagine that lack of human interaction is a big problem, but the second one is distractions and too many meetings. I can imagine like having multiple meetings with human, that doesn't count as human interaction. So one very interesting thing is less sleep, especially from working from home. Why people don't sleep more at home, I think this is something very problematic. The too many snack breaks kind of connects with the previous topic of unlimited food and drinks. This is like a double-edged sword, which I think people should be very careful about. And the sleep is something people should do more. And I think this is something that, especially in our community, it's very underestimated. Like, we like the all-night codings and all of this overwork, and this is something which is people don't feel like a problem, but I have seen it like it's a big problem. Moving on, this is another interesting trend when I'm looking at old versus new and seeing how for working professional, macOS is almost as big as Windows and bigger than Ubuntu, and it switches for younger generation. And I can imagine a lot of this is around the price, like for Windows machines, especially students might not have enough money to buy a Mac, but actually having the Ubuntu on that place is actually a very interesting trend. And one of the biggest things early on in the early days of Apple in the early 2000s, a lot of people noticed that a lot of software professionals, the good ones, are having Macs. And this was like a good sign that, okay, if those are the people who follow the trend, this is what happens. So maybe we're coming to the Linux desktop trend, and this might make a very interesting play of like knowing this technology. So this was also something very surprising here. And the music is also very interesting, not so much for the information, but the differences between the younger and the older generations and how that music trends are having. It's just like a fun anecdote. Another here is, where do people search for job opportunities? And it's very interesting that the data for both segments is fairly similar. And this shows again where people go, like how LinkedIn is the place where you need to have a good LinkedIn profile, a good place to get a lot of that. Job portals is again another place. Referrals is another important thing, for especially for young engineers, to think about, okay, I should have a lot of networking in my career. Like, all the best referrals are people who I worked with, and I can say, yeah, I want to work with those people again. So especially people who are early in their career, they should really focus to get to know their teammates. I know it's a bit hard in this remote environment, but they should really focus on getting this referrals. And how do you get referrals? You get friends at the places you work. You learn, and that's not only your teammates, that is your managers, that's all the other places. So from here, I would get those two learnings, like make your LinkedIn profile pristine, like keep it clean, and also make connections at work so you actually know people. So overall, you can grow by referrals. The next one was must have benefits for developers. And the things here is as Steve mentioned, the idea is to learn, to grow, and the things that are very important. And the things also are very different between the working professionals and students. Like, obviously, the working professionals is a cohort which they have kids, they have a lot more responsibilities. So for them, the compensation is a lot higher on the top list, while for the younger people, the career growth is very important. But the other thing, which is the engaging work, especially for the working professional. The engaging work is something where when you are younger, you say, yeah, I just want to grow in my career. Everything is interesting for me. Everything is big. But when you are a bit more experienced, for you actually want to engage more with what you work, because you develop some skills and now you want to put those skills into a good use. And the final thing I wanted to mention here is the things that people like and people don't like. And it's interesting how the working people dislike a bit more things than the younger people. And the downtime is very interesting. Like, people really don't like downtime. And I was suspecting that this would be reversed between the students. I prefer the students want a bit more energy, less downtime, while the working professionals would prefer that. But that's not very true. Also, again, we see that the stuff around the generation is not so big. Like, people Some people actually like legacy code, which is very surprising, even for younger people. I don't know why 70% of them like the older code, but that means like I wouldn't expect this like 5 years ago to be say, or like having one technology. That's very interesting data here. And again, everybody just wants to work in somewhere where it's like a big old machine, like stuff just works. So yeah, this is kind of the things I was thinking while I was browsing to the data. There is a lot more information. I'm still kind of digesting it all in my head. But yeah, that's from me.
Rado, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Again, this is for the audience. If you have any questions for Rado, please feel free to drop them into the question box that you see on your Zoom control panel. We do have one question for you, Rado, and I think this is around the popular programming languages that are data reflected in it. In C++, Python, Java leading that trend. So what are your thoughts or suggestions on developers looking to learn Dart language?
The language Dart?
Yes.
I mean, if people want to learn it, they should learn it. Like, especially when you are younger, there is nothing bad at learning a new programming language. Every programming language has great ideas. Dart in particular, to be honest, I don't know anybody who uses it outside of Google. I'm not very familiar with the language myself, but again, every programming language is important. Like, in my opinion, every software engineer should know at least 6 or 8 or 10, at least 10 programming languages in a good, decent level with different styles, so they're not scared when they see a new technology. So every time somebody asks, should I learn something? The answer should be always yes.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, Rado, for answering that. We now move on to a short discussion round to further discuss these developer and tech hiring trends in detail. Sachin, over to you.
Thanks, Samantha. And thanks a lot, Rado and Steve. I think tons of very valuable insights and interpretation that you guys put into the report, and it's quite interesting to see the apply the lens of the recruiting side, and then apply the lens of the hiring manager side, and see the different ways in we could look at the same data. So thanks a lot for all that the perspective. So first question to you, Steve. Hiring has always been hard. Like tech hiring has always been hard, and it's becoming more and more fierce because of increasing demand and all of those things. So as recruiters think about their strategy and what they should be doing in the coming year, can you talk about some of the obstacles that the hiring team should watch out for as they kind of plan their recruiting journey ahead? Steve, I think you're on mute.
Thank you for that. One of the obstacles, and maybe the recruiters on the call can nod along with me, we need to be very careful and we need to be very thoughtful with how we partner with our hiring managers on describing the available market for various skill set combinations. When we look at skill sets as things that you just pull off of a shelf and you can add them with no consequences to a single basket, we're actually creating an aggressively and exponentially smaller target market. The hiring manager, because they don't realize always the consequences of these decisions, their expectations that we find somebody quickly that fits the culture, that's a good fit, that we can afford, don't change, right? They still think I'm going to get somebody with all those things and the mismatch of skills that I've pulled off the shelf. And so one of the biggest things I'd say is understand the way that technologies relate to one another, and understand as well that your meeting with the hiring manager, that intake call, is your opportunity to set expectations that lead to success and avoid some of the heartbreak of finding out that we can't afford it, they're not a fit, or the skill set doesn't really exist at a scale necessary for recruitment.
Got it. That makes so much sense. And I've come across this so many times. The intake call is so important, right? Like that's where you set the expectations on both the sides, and if you do it right, it's going to work out, and if you don't, it's not going to work out. And quite unsurprisingly, a lot of recruiters, particularly early in their career, may not be very confident when they are talking to the hiring managers, right? And that lack of confidence could end up in them not being assertive where they should be. So I think some focus on prepping up your recruiting team to be equipped to do that. I think that would help, as you pointed out.
I agree.
Thanks, Steve. So the next one for you, Rado. And I know it's a little bit open-ended, but when it comes to, and maybe we could apply the lens of pandemic if you would like to. But what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in developing good code, writing good code, software development, and what should any developer, be it in their early stage or in their later stage in their career, should be thinking about software development and improving the quality of what they do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very broad question, but overall, everything that comes about like writing good code is trying to not show off how great you are and how smart you are. You should try to go to a very simple solutions. And I think one of the qualities a lot of engineers should have is, I would say first, they should really know the underlying technologies they're using. They should know the programming language, the frameworks, the tools. Like that's the first thing. The second thing they should try to do is to think about how they can isolate their work. Like, what should I do if this code has to be deleted? How many files I have to go through? How isolated my changes from the rest of the system? Think about the impact you are making, not only on this function, but on the whole system. And the third one is, again, think about how can this thing can break? Like, what scenarios I might not think of? Like, if every engineer just goes to those 3 steps, knowing the basics, knowing the fundamentals, then think about isolation, how to use this, how to do namespacing, module, organizing their code, and then think about, okay, how this thing can break. Do I validate the inputs? Do I validate the outputs? What happens if there is like multi-threaded? If you think about those 3 things, I think a lot of the best software patterns are built around those 3 primitives.
Thanks, Rado. I know, I said earlier, a fairly broad question, but I think applying those 3 things that you just spoke about can help people in becoming more structured, and then eventually ending up with higher quality of work. So next one for you, Steve. Hiring methods haven't changed significantly over the last year, but there seems to be some trends. So are there trends that you're seeing when it comes to developer hiring? That you would want to talk about with the recruiting community?
So I guess I'll mention one that you could perhaps call a trend for the recruiting team. It's going to be a bit of work on you, and then I'll just tip my hat to something that's been going on but continues to power forward. During remote and virtual code reviews and coding sessions continues. It's been going on for a little bit. I don't see anything slowing down in that arena. And so for us as recruiters, making sure that we can confirm for our candidates that you're going to have this experience, give them a little bit of heads up of what it's going to be like and what's expected, because it's unnerving to walk in and sort of be told, now dance. Right now, code, and so the way that we can help everybody be more successful with something that's a bit of a trend, but has been about been around for a while, is help folks succeed in that code review. The second one, which is perhaps a bit more trendy, we see it in our social spaces. Content advertising is very big. Being able to provide content that's interesting and engaging for developers is pretty important for being able to cut through the advertising noise. And here's something to think about. Because a lot of developers are sort of curiosity and intrigue driven. I don't want to stereotype too much, but there's a lot of appetite for discovery in a developer. Being able to communicate that the company that you work for is a company that does interesting things, not about the job, not about what you're going to do, but that the company you work for does interesting things, and get that into content is valuable and helps your advertising penetrate through everybody else that raises their hand and says, I have a programming job, come do it.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. And just, kind of expand that on that a little bit. And I think I've talked about this in earlier discussions as well with other folks, that like every other marketing, even recruitment marketing is becoming more like passive driven. Like you said, advertise content, talk about the good stuff you're doing and people will come. But as a recruiter, you don't really have a lot of influence, or as a recruiting function, you may not have a lot of influence on creating that content. That either rests with hiring managers, engineers to write themselves, or you got to go and pair up with the marketing team and say, hey, let's create content which even job seekers would be interested in. So how does one tackle that problem internally in an organization? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll tie it back to an observation you had made, Sachin, with some early in career recruiters that may be intimidated or under execute on the intake call. Forgive me for being so black and white, but recruiters, this is not an area that you can surrender ground. I understand that you have to work cross-functionally and partner with teams that own budgets that you don't own, that you've got to influence. But at the end of the day, we all know that this is true. It's you that's blamed when the role's not filled, right? They're not going to blame marketing. They're not going to go to the branding team and say, oh, why is your brand interesting? They're going to blame the recruiter. So understanding that, use that as energy and motivation to say, I have to figure this out. I have to go through the uncomfortable and difficult process of partnering cross-departmentally or cross-functionally, and I need to communicate. And you can do that with data like what is in this report. Why it's so important that we take this problem seriously, that we apply resources to solve it. And then if this isn't your style of thinking, partner with somebody whose it is, share with them the return on investment, right, for getting this done right. How does the allocation of those resources from a department that you don't own result in a return on investment that they can take credit for, helping lasso in their self-interest to match it with yours cooperatively? So agree, it's tough, but I just say you can't surrender that ground because it'll be your fault at the end of the day.
Gotcha. So it's all about taking that ownership. Like you said, at the end of the day, you're going to be responsible. So go figure it out and influence people. I think we have one question that's coming from Susan, and I think it may be directed at you, Steve. So maybe we'll do that, and then I'll move over to Rado for the last question for the panel. So this one's from Susan Martin. What's the best way to get a hiring manager to look at a candidate without the specific language they're looking for? For example, I have a strong proven candidate with success building a product in Python, but my hiring manager says we have to hire a developer with Scala only.
So it's a great question and it's worth some thought. And so I'm going to do the best I can with a great question right now. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. The one, and I don't think that you'd object to this, Susan, you have to be right. Right? Like you have to be right that it's worth taking a look at that candidate. It can't just be that like, oh, you shouldn't be so picky. There needs to be a level of technical alignment with you and the hiring manager so that there's actually an argument there. And so first, have technical understanding that underpins your argument. I think the second thing is to understand the team environment in which this person without the skill set is going to come into. So let's imagine, for the sake of conversation, that you've got a team of 10 developers and 9 are super strong with Python, and you've got one with all of the aptitude to do it, but they just happen to have a different coding background. Perhaps it is reasonable to expect that the strength of the team will elevate the capabilities of the individual, and there may be something else that you get from that person by allowing them to be hired and elevated by the team. For example, perhaps you can afford the person, right? Like maybe part of the reason you can't get the skill set is you're not paying market value. And this may be a creative way to lever in the strength of the team into the capability of the candidate that has a strong foundation that leans on point one, right? You can't be wrong. You can't just be making a recommendation that doesn't work. Now, here's the third thing. This is sort of an empathetic and dialogue-oriented approach, which I only distinguish because it takes time. It's not a quick fix. Understand from your hiring manager what their experience has been with having staff surprise them and become more than they thought they could be. And even if it's about themselves, tell me about somebody that overcame. What was it about the person that left this job, right, that you really liked? Help them remember that visualizing the potential of somebody is not something that you get rid of when you're hiring, right? Like we don't become these derivative deduction machines when we're hiring and forget that people are full of potential and appetite and motion, right? But you can't just make that argument, right? It sounds fluffy, like you're reading a self-help book. So help them identify that we believe in people through their own stories and their own experiences, and then match that to believing in this person if, again, the first point is true, you're right, and you're not just making a recommendation to try and fill the rack.
Very interesting thought, Steve. Looks like you've done this over the years and comes off with a lot of experience. So thanks for that. I think we're on the final question for this short discussion, and that's the end of the panel. And this one's for you, Radu. And we touched upon this a couple of times during the both you and I touched upon it. So with Zoom fatigue being real, and organizations going back to some of them opening up, some of them opening up partially, some of them doing like a hybrid. Google is doing a hybrid. Apple wants everybody to be back. Some of the organizations are full remote. So we are definitely going to end up in a different world than what it used to be earlier. And even if you are a developer who's today working at a fully remote organization, tomorrow you may go into a hybrid one, or vice versa. Online meetings, Zoom meetings are to be there to stay. So how does one really overcome the Zoom fatigue? Anything that has worked for you with your own engineering team, guidelines or best practices that help you manage remote teams better?
Yeah, the way I'm thinking about all that stuff is like first principles. Like the problem with Zoom fatigue is real, it's bad. So let's have less Zoom meetings. Like the things I'm trying to do with my team is like, if somebody on my engineering team has more than 2 Zoom meetings per week, something is wrong. And trying to set up like a clear agenda. And also one thing which works really well, and this is with every meeting, but with Zoom in particular, is finish faster. Like a lot of the times, people are in meetings and it's like, okay, we're done in 5 minutes. And then let's discuss something else in the next 10 minutes. Let's just free that time. Also, a lot of the times when you go to a Zoom meeting, you should always be prepared. You should always have the agenda. You should always have the questions. You should always have the data. A lot of times what you can do is, okay, I have some questions before the meetings. Here are the questions. And actually those questions can invalidate the whole meeting. Like the problem with Zoom meetings is you just have to reduce the number of them. Apart from that, the other things you can do are more spatial. Like, for example, try to have like a good light. Like I have to put my lights right now because I was in a dark room and my eyes are kind of bleeding because I don't control my, like for example, when I do code, when I do editor, I control the background, I control the images, so I can be a lighter light or dark mode. With Zoom, you can't. So you try to have somewhere where you have like a nice light. You try to, for example, not to look too sleepy, like don't just try to have your hands up or something like that. Just don't switch between different windows and between different things. I know it's tiresome, I know it's problematic, but it helps you not being surprised by somebody asking you a question. You're like, okay, I just read something on Twitter, I have no idea what you're talking about. So yeah, try to pay attention and try to end the meeting quickly. That's the best, I think, advice.
That's interesting. 2 meetings per week. I think that's a good benchmark to hold one self accountable to. I know it's a hard one, but we should all strive for that. I think that's the end of the question and answers. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Sachin. With that, our webinar has come to the end and we're right on time. Panel, thank you for sharing your thoughts, strategies, and valuable insights. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're definitely walking away with a lot more understanding about the world of developers today. Sachin, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. Rado, for highlighting the importance of this data for the tech community, and Steve, for sharing your thoughts on how the recruiting community can actually benefit from these insights. Before I wrap up, I'd like to quickly go back to the question I dropped earlier during my introduction. For all of you who sent me a yes, and for those of you who've also said that you relate to the challenges around managing, engaging, sustaining, and scaling your tech talent, I have news for you. So this whole process of engaging tech talent can be a whole lot easier. And at HackerEarth, we help give you a one-stop solution through an integrated suite where you can source and engage developers everywhere through fully managed hackathons and hiring challenges. You can screen hundreds of them effectively in minutes using our coding assessment platform and run incredibly smooth coding interviews remotely using our tool. All right, with that, we are good to end. Panel, would you like to share anything else before we wrap up?
Thanks for the time, guys. You know, for the developers, you've got an exciting career and place to work in, and recruiters, let's keep the economy working. Let's keep the grease on the skids.
Perfect. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you again. It was a pleasure hosting you all today, panel, and thanks to everyone who attended. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we'd love to hear your feedback on the survey form that you will receive soon after this event. This is your host, Samantha, signing off. Have a great day.